What's up, everyone? Today we have Mr. Andrew Pudewa. He is the founder of Institute of Excellence in Writing. He is an absolute rock star when it comes to working with homeschooling families. Miss Beth did his curriculum at some point during her homeschooling career. Today's conversation, we go into AI, talking about if your kids having trouble reading, what you can do. He talks about how he got started in creating this amazing curriculum he has. All in all, is an absolutely wonderful interview. Miss Beth, what do you got on it?
I loved how he talked about the importance of critical thinking, how we can develop that in our kids, the importance of reading aloud to our children, and how that develops well-rounded thinking. Absolutely loved it. It was fascinating.
Yeah, no, he made a good point because I was listening to something the other day and they said that if you can't explain the reason you believe something, it means you're brainwashed. So that just goes back to you guys will see what I'm talking about in the interview. But all in all, I'm super excited for this one. So let us know what you guys think. We'll see you inside. What's up, everyone? Today we have one of my favorite human beings, Mr. Andrew here. He's the founder of Institute of Excellence in Writing. Now we did record an interview once before on our end. We had a hiccup, so we lost it. So, however, we hope this one is going to be just as good as the last one. If you could, Mr. Andrew, just give them a quick overview who you are, what you guys do, and kind of how you fell into this.
Yeah, sure. So, most important is I'm a father of seven children, and I am now expecting grandchild number 20 to come this year. So that's exciting. And I just always like to say, for anybody who wonders, having grandchildren is probably the best thing about actually being a human being that I have ever experienced in my whole life. So, y'all, young people, think long term. But we homeschooled our seven children almost every year. I put kids in school once or twice for a short period of time, kind of as an experiment or to, an effort to save their mother's sanity. But it didn't last very long. So we've been doing the homeschooling a lot. All of my school age children, grandchildren, are being homeschooled.
That's
And
awesome.
my background is in music. Oddly, I became a Suzuki violin teacher in my 20s, and I spent, the good first third of my adult life full-time teaching Suzuki violin and kinder music. And then I started about 30 years ago the Institute for Excellence in Writing. At first, it was kind of just a part-time gig, so I could go teach a few seminars, make a little extra money to figure out how I could afford to be a violin teacher. And after about 5 years, it started to take off, and so I went full-time. And now we have a pretty good-sized company with about 60 some people working. We've got a whole line of products to help teachers and parents, help students develop the skills of listening, speaking, reading, writing, and corollary to that, we believe better thinking.
Hmm.
So our headquarters is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and but we do business all over the world. I travel and teach. I do a lot of homeschool convention speaking. This year I'll be at least a dozen different locations. And then we work with mostly classical schools, charter schools, pod schools, micro schools, hybrid schools, the alternative forms of education. That's actually the fastest thing growing out there. And that's very exciting to me. So that's in a nutshell, what we do. Anyone wants to learn more about it, just look for my name on YouTube and you can listen for more hours than you will want to.
Yeah, and we've talked to quite a few different people, and they say at the convention you're always the superstar that everyone's always crowding around you. So hopefully, if they get a chance to see you in live, that will be a great opportunity for them. If you could kind of just touch on the Suzuki method, and because like I told you in the previous conversations, I played violin, and that was the method we used. Just kind of what it is for parents that don't know, and then kind of how you correlated it into the Institute of Excellence in Writing.
Yeah, so I I grew up playing the violin. I started at like 5 years old, and then I quit in high school for a while, and then as a young adult, I picked it up again. I went to observe a few different teachers, and I realized the common factor of the teachers that I thought were good, the ones who seemed like they knew what they were doing, they had all been to Japan or had studied with someone who'd been to Japan. And I actually kind of dropped out of college and didn't want to go back. So I thought, well, go to Japan and learn that. That's as good as anything. You know, you're 20 something, you don't know what you're going to do in your life. So I lived in Japan for 3 years and studied with Dr. Shinichi Suzuki while he was alive. He was young in his 80s, and he taught every morning 2 hour group lessons 7 days a week, 9 to 11 a.m. Nobody could keep up with him. He was just, he was, as the government of Japan labeled him, a national living treasure and had a greater impact on more children's lives than perhaps anyone else I can think of. But his story is rather interesting in that he began teaching and he noticed something about children, and that was that they all learned a very, very hard thing at a young age, seemingly effortlessly, and that was to speak their own language. Like all Japanese children speak Japanese. They don't even go to school to learn this. And it's the hardest thing you can ever learn to do is speak a language fluently. How did this happen? So he identified four pillars of what he called originally the mother tongue method of education. And then later the name was changed to Saino Kyoiku, which is Japanese and can be translated either as talent education or ability development.
Mm.
And so he said, okay, you know, what are the factors that allow children to learn their language so easily? Well, number one, they start at a very young age. And a lot of people don't start learning a foreign language until, you know, high school or later, or but they get this chance to learn their language from birth. And one of his books, which I highly recommend, is called Ability Development from Age Zero. And he talks about the power of what Maria Montessori also called the absorbent mind. We know that the brain is growing faster in the first 3 years, the first 6 years of life, than it ever will from thence forward. And so he got this idea to, teach music to children much younger than the traditional age at that time. And it was somewhat convenient because his family owned a violin factory. And so he was able to get small made violins more easily. And he started teaching young children, you know, 7, 6, 5, even 4, some even 3 years old. And this was, of course, quite radical in the world at that time, you know, the early 1900s. He was doing this, and most people were of the attitude, well, what you should do is wait until a child is old enough to show whether or not they have inborn talent, you know, 11, 12 years old. And if they show musical talent, then and only then would you invest in music lessons. Whereas he said, no, every child can develop talent. And so he really was trying to redefine the word as to something that was inborn, genetic, just a gift, as opposed to something that could be cultivated in all human beings. The second thing he noticed was that that Japanese children had a huge advantage of living in Japan. And so he realized that if you want to teach something well, you want to saturate the environment with those things. And they were, you know, hearing, seeing, um, feeling, kinesthetically, telepathically. Japanese was coming into their minds and souls. So he created recordings of the repertoire. And you probably remember growing up, you had to, you know, listen to the records or tapes, or maybe you were even in the CD age, I don't know.
EDH.
Um, but listening to the recordings of the music that you were going to learn to play so that you would learn the music by ear, and
Hmm.
then all you had to do was train your fingers and hands to do that. You didn't have to learn the music, say, from notes on a page, which, was originally the idea that he understood, young children can't really decode notes very well. Of course, they would learn by ear, just like they learn their language by ear. You don't say to children, well, you have to read before you can speak. No, it's the listening and speaking is a precursor to the reading and playing. So, um, that was the recording. Again, very radical in the world. A lot of music teachers kind of viewed that as cheating. Oh, if you listen to a recording of the piece, well, then you won't have to learn to read the notes. So don't do that. And of course, uh, half a century later, everyone realized, well, that was the best way to cultivate the highest level of ability. And you can go pretty much anywhere in the world and see the whole first violin sections were Suzuki kids, 20, 30, 40 years ago. The third thing that he noticed is that children learn best from their own parents. That's why it's called the mother tongue, and they pick up the nuance by being surrounded in the environment, by hearing it all the time, by starting at an early age, and then having a mother who just, continuously models for them and corrects and models and corrects. And, a kid might say, me go store. And the mom would say, you mean I will go to the store? I will go store, and so through that feedback loop, that's how we develop the fluency and the correctness of language. And that children's ears are extremely sensitive to this, even so much that you live in a different part of the country and your accent or your dialect will be slightly different depending on, who you grew up with and the influence primarily of parents as primary teachers. So he actually created this whole idea of rather than teach the child and expect the child to remember everything, go home and practice. If you're dealing particularly with young children, 5, 6 years old, that's not even reasonable. You would teach the mother or the parent, and then the parent would go home and practice with the child every day. And so music lessons for young children in Japan consisted of, maybe 5 or 10 minutes doing something with the child, and then the child goes and, plays with blocks or something, and the teacher would spend the remaining time helping the parent understand exactly how to do it and how to help the child do it. Again, very radical at that time in the world. Um, this idea of teaching parents really didn't exist universally until Suzuki method came and became an international phenomenon in the 1970s and 80s and expanded from there. The last one, which is the one that I think pertains the most to what I do now with Institute for Excellence in Writing, is this idea of kind of the easy plus one approach. So a mastery approach. So Suzuki noted that when children learn language, they don't learn a whole bunch of words and try to memorize them all at once. They start using one word and they use it again and again and again and again until it's easy. And then they get another word and they use both of those words again and again until it's easy. And they get another word and use all those words again and again. They start putting words together and they'll speak in little couplets or short sentences again and again. And they'll just keep using everything they've learned until it's easy and then add in another one. And so that they gradually increase their vocabulary and their complexity of grammar and their understanding in this kind of organic, natural way. Whereas I don't know, if you or Beth or anybody has ever taken like a foreign language class in high school or tried to learn a foreign language as an adult. Okay, here's the vocabulary list. Memorize the vocabulary list. Take a quiz. Okay, now here's some grammar. Memorize the grammar. Okay, take a quiz. Okay, memorize the next list and take a quiz. And okay, you've learned hundreds of words, but how many can you actually use? You
Yeah.
don't have the fluency or ease. So this came over into the music repertoire as maintaining a memorized repertoire. So children learn twinkle variations and theme. You probably remember that Taka Taka Stop Up and Lightly Row and Go Tell Aunt Rhody and so you learn a piece, but keep playing that piece every day while you learn another piece. and play both of those pieces every day while you learn another piece, and keep playing all the pieces that you ever have learned until you kind of don't have time, and then you can start rotating them around. But a properly trained Suzuki student, properly trained, would be able to pretty much play every piece they ever learned on demand from memory and make it look pretty easy. And so that's the ideal. That's what we strive for. And I will say that, it involves a tremendous amount of repetition. And I'm not sure that Suzuki method would have taken so well had it been born in the West as opposed to Japan and the East, only because the Eastern traditions, I think, have retained an understanding of the value of repetition more than we have, you know. They have a saying in Japan. We don't have any equivalent for it in English, but it translates literally as 10,000 times and then begins understanding. Then begins understanding, right? What do we do? Try again. Third time's a charm. If you don't get it by then, just give up and go do something else, you know?
Yeah.
Although if you go way back, into the classical tradition, you do see much greater respect for the power of repetitio mater studiorum is Latin
Mhm.
for repetition is the mother of learning. So there are a lot of consonances between classical education as we see it today and Suzuki method. And we at IEW have kind of tried to join these things together. I wouldn't even say we tried to, we just accidentally did. I would put the hidden hand at work and the Holy Spirit behind everything. But what we see then is that we can move into this area of teaching language arts, particularly reading and writing, with this method of the easy plus one, with the understanding of the power of modeling and bringing in um, things for children to imitate and learn through imitation the best way to do something. And then gradually you see the creativity increase because really creativity isn't about coming up with something completely new. Nobody ever does that. Creativity is actually about the combination and permutation of previously existing ideas or skills or techniques or thoughts. So that's kind of my background in Suzuki method, and we can talk more about the mechanics of how the writing program works if you'd like, or the importance of furnishing the mind with high quality language.
Yeah, if you could kind of just expand on what you were saying, the modeling and then also the repetition of constantly trying and trying again. I can remember when I was dual enrolling in college, I had a pre-calculus exam, and I had an A in the class. Everyone else was failing the class, and I was on a mission to get 100% on the final. Like I was on a mission, and my mom was like, "All right, well, math. The only way to learn math is do math, like over and over and over again." So I did. She gave us all of our previous exams, in a study form, and my mom made me sit there for like 6 hours a day and just take them, and then she would rewrite the problems differently because she's a math teacher, and I would just study for like a week out, and by the time I walked into the exam, it was just there because I did it so many times. I ended up getting like 105% because I got the bonus question right as well. And it just it was a light bulb moment that if you want to be good at something, you just have to continuously do it over and over and over and over again. And if you could also touch on like the modeling and, how important it is for homeschooling parents to actually be the models for their child's education and what that would look like in the homeschooling household.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. A lot of people might consider 6 hours of pre-calculus every day a form of child abuse, but it looks like you turned out all right. And, there's this big argument right now in modern education circles. Do we really need to teach kids fill in the blank? Right? Do
Mhm.
we really need to teach kids math? Do we really need to teach kids spelling? Do we really need to teach kids grammar because now we have technology that does all of those things better than any of us. But what I think, you and um, anyone with a bit of common sense would would realize we don't teach kids, math and grammar and spelling only so that they can do math and grammar and spelling. When's the last time you used any pre-calculus in your daily life? No.
They don't
But what
stop.
happens is by learning that, we grow our brain. We make neural connections. We start to understand. We become better thinkers for having mastered that thing.
Mhm.
And so the real argument um, against too much tech in the schools, especially in the younger grades, is that you basically kind of get brain atrophy, right? If you
Mhm.
have a calculator and you don't ever have to learn what 6 times 7 is, why bother? It's tedious. It's memorization. That's drill and kill. That's rote learning. That's horrible. That's child, right? And you get this whole mentality, but then you run that down 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years out. Now you got teenagers who can't know what 10% of something is
Mhm.
because they never learned it and they can't do any kind of mental math thinking about anything. And that's just tragic to me. That is a lifetime handicap. And you get too old, how do you go backwards? How do you go back and learn that stuff?
Mhm.
With language, it's kind of the same thing. One of the things I realized early on, I was actually doing a talk on spelling, and the talk was, and it's on YouTube. Anyone wants to watch it? It's called "Spelling and the Brain." A much younger me, and I said something. It kind of popped out of my mouth, and I heard myself say it, and I thought, "That's brilliant." But it wasn't all that brilliant. It was just like, duh, anybody would notice this, but it was significant. And what I said is, you can't get something out of a brain that isn't in there to begin with,
Mhm.
right? You
Mhm.
don't get correctly spelled words out of a brain that doesn't have correctly spelled words, especially in English. You cannot intuit, you cannot guess correctly how to spell. You can't even guess correctly how to read, right? You have to have basic decoding skills, and they have to be taught as skills. It's the same thing with writing. You don't get people producing, reliably correct and appropriately sophisticated language without building the database of reliably correct and appropriately sophisticated language. So, how is that done? And that became a big theme for me for 2 decades, was furnishing the mind. I really like that idiom, furnishing, because it indicates that, yeah, we all have a brain, we all have a mind. Some people have better one, bigger one than others. But the size of your house doesn't matter nearly as much as what's in your house, right? You could have a small, humble little bungalow of a mind, like me, but if it's furnished well with useful and beautiful and helpful and enriching things, then you have a good place to live. And we all live in our mind.
Mhm.
Otherwise, what have you got? Empty, you got cardboard boxes and pallets to sit on, right? So what you furnish your mind with is far more important than we would think. And when it comes to language, we furnish that through primarily the language we take in through our ear. And again, it goes back to kind of the Suzuki method. It's the first 6 years that are the most formative in terms of neurological growth, the first 12 years, probably in terms of cognitive development and understanding complexity of language. And that's why I became a huge proponent of reading aloud to children.
Mhm.
And not just, picture books to 5-year-olds, but even once kids start reading on their own, to continue to read to them at a level above their own decoding skills. That's what pulls up vocabulary. That's what pulls up comprehension of sophisticated language. And, once upon a time before television, that was pretty much the only thing that there was to do for entertainment. Whole
Mhm.
families would sit around, right, in one room because light and heat were expensive, and they would just read to each other. They'd read the Bible, they'd read Shakespeare, they'd read the great works of the day, they'd read the newspaper, they would read. And so young children would just grow up in this linguistically enriched environment, and people used to speak in a more complex and sophisticated way. In fact, I saw one study, and I don't remember where it was, but it was comparing the active vocabulary with Americans today is about half of what it was 50 years ago.
Wow.
That's pretty
Wow.
shocking. But
That's good.
and 50 years ago was about half of what it was 50 years before that. And so, and you read, if you know, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to see some of these letters that people wrote in, say,
Hmm.
Civil War era, late 1800s. And you read these letters by Civil War soldiers and whatnot, and you just read it and you think, that is incredible writing.
Hmm.
The vocabulary, the beauty, the sophistication, the grammar, it's elegant, it's meaningful. I couldn't write that well today. I don't know anybody who could write. And these were people who had maybe eighth grade education back in
Yeah.
1870, 1880, right? Um,
Hmm.
and so we've really seen a phenomenal decline. And you can pin it almost to two things: compulsory education and television, because those are the two things that gradually started to take kids out of the home and then distract them when they were in the home with a much lower level of sophistication. And of course, now we don't really even have television in the sense that we did when I was a kid. When I was a kid, there were stations and a TV guide, and you had to look and see which show you wanted to watch at which time on which day. And now it's continuous, and the
Hmm.
brain rot phenomenon is scary to everyone. So what's happening is we're seeing the decline of language uh, comprehension just because of the decline of the sophistication of input. And then we're seeing the decline of output. And it's so bad that, the SAT, when it redesigned itself, you know, what was it, 6 years ago, they went entirely online. It eliminated the essay portion of the SAT, which was
Hmm.
kind of a key idea for about 20 years, which is, let's put an essay on the test to force the teachers in the schools to teach the kids how to write, because guess what? Writing is the number one predictor of graduation rates,
I
right?
didn't know that.
Writing
Yeah.
skill and graduation rates were very closely tied for a long time. And it makes sense because a lot of people in college, even if they were going into engineering, they had to take, gen ed, they had to take English, they had to take a Western Civ, whatever. And so, yeah, but now we see almost the complete collapse of attention to that, and even this argument of, and you'll hear people on TikTok or Instagram, I'm a teacher and I actually believe that we shouldn't bother teaching kids anymore because AI does it. What we really need to do is spend our time teaching them to use AI well. And
Mhm.
we could unpack that a little bit, but so what I have seen is a very, very direct correlation between the amount of high quality literature coming into children's brains, primarily auditorily, and then supplemented through their own reading, and then their what you might call natural writing aptitude in adulthood.
Yeah, and I would honestly, so this is kind of a selfish question, but you touched on something super important before I asked my question, that reading aloud to your kids, and it allows them to actually hear it, and then they can start making those neurological connections. But we've had quite a few parents who are concerned that their kids are reading below what would be their state's like age appropriate range. If a parent's running into that problem, what would be the best solution, do you think, for them to help bring their kid up to where they're supposed to be, and then also help them excel to where they are, like you're saying, they're more sophisticated in the way they can read, write, and everything like that?
Yeah, you'd have to look you'd have to look at some possible scenarios that could be causative factors of, quote, below level reading. One of them could be that the kids were in school and they weren't being taught how to read.
Mm,
There's been really bad writing instruction, or, well, writing, yes. There's been really bad reading instruction going on for half a century because they went into this idea of throwing out phonics and putting in, you know, well, the first iteration was look, say, and then the second iteration was whole language, and the third iteration has got various names, but they essentially threw out kind of a phonics based approach and replaced it with a guessing based approach. So look for clues in the text, look for clues in the pictures, give it your best shot. If you can kind of approximate the meaning, you don't really have to know exactly what the words are. And there are still a good number of teachers who believe this, and a good number of schools and and even teacher training programs that will promote this. And so if that's the problem, that you had a kid in school and nobody taught him to read, then it's a pretty easy fix. You get them out of that school, or you leave them in the school, but you get them and you get a really good, solid phonics-based
Mhm.
reading program. And there are
mm,
lots of them out there, and you can, look for something that looks like it'll work for you. I would recommend try to do something that is not screen-based. All
mm,
the research out there shows that kids learn to read better on paper than they do on screens. All the research. And yet the schools are now careening toward the paperless classroom and trying to teach, 7-year-olds how to read by having a fancy, quote, individualized, even AI driven,
mhm,
screen-based reading, individualized reading program. But those aren't working. And they haven't been working for several years, whereas direct instruction in English phonics always gets the best results. So that's an easy fix. Another thing that can be a considerable factor is dyslexia and dysgraphia, right? So there you've got an actual neurological problem, and then you can look at, things that are designed to help you work with
mhm.
dyslexic kids. I would recommend Susan Barton
Okay.
Reading. She has got a tremendous track record of helping dyslexic kids, just walk through the steps. It's harder, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. And yet, a lot of people are kind of saying, oh, no, my child's dyslexic. It's too hard for him. Well, yeah, you can always say something's too hard for somebody, but that doesn't mean that there aren't ways to do it and learn it and practice it and separate complexity. That's what you really have to do is separate complexity. You can also have the problem of attention issues, right? You've got spectrum, stuff, kids on the spectrum, ADHD, all of that. Um, and the schools can't really deal with that because they don't have the means to give those kids the more individualized attention that they need. So a lot of parents discover pull the kid out or just take a half an hour a day and work with a child in a way that allows them to move around if they need to move around and be prone on the floor if they need to be prone on the floor or have squeeze balls if they need squeeze, all that stuff. But a lot of times it's the individualized interaction that will make all the difference, and they're not getting that in school. I would say the broadest problem is just lack of exposure to high quality language, right? So
Mhm,
if kids are spending a lot of time with peers, peers, as you might guess, do not actually provide a very high quality of language. Like it's not going to give them a higher level of vocabulary or complexity of syntax, correct grammar, thought, logical sequencing, right? Peers just aren't going to do that. You put a dozen 9-year-olds in one room together, they will sink down to the lowest common level of intellectual capacity and language exchange, right?
no way.
They won't imitate the higher level, they will sink to the lowest level. because they're all 9 years old, so they're all equal. So it's uncool, right,
Hmm.
to not be like everybody else.
Hmm.
However, in a mixed age environment, which is natural to a home or a family, natural to, say, a one-room schoolhouse of ages ago, natural to some micro schools or pod schools or homeschool co-op groups, then when you've got kids that are, say, 9, 10, 11, 12, all in one room together, the 9-year-olds are always tending to imitate up,
Hmm.
right? And the older kids can be easily coached into being the best that they can be to model down. That's a
Hmm.
human instinct, is to
Yes.
for kids to imitate up and model down. So that's why a mixed age environment, socially, intellectually, is always better. So when you can combine that with the individualized technical instruction for that's needed for improvement in reading, improvement in math, improvement in writing. But you get this opportunity to build the database through reading aloud to kids. Better vocabulary goes in, better vocabulary comes out. And I think most kids, if they're in age segregated environments for a lot of the time, they're at home with parents who unfortunately are on their phones a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And they are defaulting to a screen-based entertainment or even a reward system. You get parents who say, yeah, do your math homework and you can have half an hour of game time, right? Well, okay, fine, I get it, but that's just half an hour of screen-based, mindless, non-language-based, non-problem solving, non-skills development, except how to move your fingers and shoot something kind of thing. Now, is there a time and place for games in children's life? Absolutely. Um, we would all be better off if the screens weren't a source of entertainment for any of us. What would
Yes.
we have to do? We'd have to read books and talk to each other and draw pictures and play music and do
Hmm.
human things. So the screens have dehumanized our environment, which is ironic because we're talking on a screen right now. But you get my point, especially that which is aimed at children.
Hmm.
And so that's the biggest shift. And so I would think to improve a child's reading, the first thing you would try to do is replace as much screen time as you can with reading to them audiobooks. You know, give a kid audiobooks and Legos or audiobooks and, you know, clay or paper to draw with, keep their hands busy. Instantly, you're going to start improving the language environment.
I love that. And what a, what a crazy thing you said there, because even now, like the other day I was in a waiting room and I looked around and everybody's on their phone, and I even had my urge to pull my phone out, but I was like, hold on a second. Let's try to kind of put that urge aside and be the only one that is not on my phone. And it's weird because now you see people in public and there is no more communication. There is no more of that people bonding or just having a normal conversation, because
Yeah,
everyone takes that easy route to just look at their screen. Now they feel safe. They're doing their own thing. They feel like they're doing something as well, compared to back in the day where if you were sitting around in a group or you're in a waiting room, naturally there's going to be conversations going on, which is going to be, in my head, I guess, raising your ability to communicate. It's also going to be helping you, maybe they say something that you never heard of and now you research it. So it's crazy to think that in this day and age that even the screens at the younger age can have such an impact, but we're seeing it in adults where I feel like in my age group, at least, the communication level has dropped significantly. And it only scares me to think what the next generation is going to have,
yeah.
because everyone's going to be wired to be on their phone, on their screens. If you could touch on something that you mentioned, people are more worried about teaching the kids how to use AI rather than teaching them the stuff so that way their brain has that inside of it. Like that way you can't recall, like you said, something your brain doesn't know. So in this day and age, when you're talking to the parents, some of them might be jumping into the hype. Oh yeah, I want my kid to be, which there are business and fields out there for you to have AI, but I feel like you'll be able to use the AI if you do choose to go down there better if you actually have a brain that can tell it what to do rather than just having the brain to ask a question, get a response.
Absolutely. You know, the simplest analogy, and almost anyone would see this. You have two people. One person learned how to do some mental math. They learned their multiplication tables, they understand percentages and fractions, they're able to approximate calculations in their brain. If you give them something like 22 times 7, you know, they could come close.
Yeah.
Or maybe they could say, yeah, I know exactly what that is because they have the capacity to think mathematically, right? And what's a third of 150, right? That shouldn't be too hard for someone who has basic math skills.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you've got a person who never learned their multiplication tables, cannot calculate 10% of 100, doesn't understand any relationship between fractions and percentages. Okay, now you give both of these people a calculator. Who's going to use it better?
The person who knows it.
Obviously, obviously, almost any human being would admit that point, right? I'd say AI is going to be exactly the same. Let's say you can read decently well, you can write decently well, you know decent grammar, and you have a sense of what language should do. You got someone else who never learned that, and you give them both AI. Well, one person's going to use AI, and the other person is going to either completely fail to use AI or they're going to be used by the AI.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's that old thing. Do we want to control the technology or do we want the technology to control us? And of course, what we see in the commercial world is everything is basically stimulus response. Even go into classrooms, right? And you give these kids little programs on how to read, how to spell, how to do math. The program is constantly directing the child. The machine is telling the human being what to do. I don't want that. I
No.
want me to tell the machine what to do. So, you know, the other thing that, and I know we're going to run out of time, unfortunately, soon, but the one thing I would point out also is thinking, right? Everybody wants critical thinking. What even is that? Most people who use the term can't really define it very well. But to do critical thinking, you have to know stuff, right? You
Yep.
can't make a judgment about whether something is reasonable or not if you don't have information upon which to base that judgment. Well, where should that information come from? Probably facts, probably real science, real history. Where are most young people getting most of their information from? Other people's opinions in their little silos coming
Yep.
out of their TikTok feeds.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any, you know, they don't have the same foundation of real information and knowledge to
Mhm.
make any judgments, to make any critical thinking possible. So really, if we wanted better critical thinking, we would work on giving children more encyclopedic knowledge about history and science and philosophy and what have human beings been talking about, writing about, and thinking about for many thousands of years, not just what someone whining about today. So, that's I think a super critical thing. But even once you get that knowledge, you also have the skill, you have to have the skill to access that, right? So I do this little experiment. I used to travel around and teach kids a lot. I don't do so much, but I love teaching teenagers because, they're honest for one. And so I would say to a group of teenagers, okay, so you have to answer this prompt. You have to write something. So basically, it's saying to you, think now about this and write it down.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make that happen? How do you force yourself to think? And every one of us has had that blank page, blank brain, blank page, blank brain. I can't think of anything. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, right? It's a rare person who hasn't experienced that at least once. And many
Mm-hmm.
people, that's their default mode. They never know what to think because they don't know how. So I always tease the kids. I say, okay, first of all, you cannot think a thought you can't think, so relax. You don't have to. You just have to find something you can think. You just have to find something you do know and get it out of your brain. Now, if you want to be a better thinker, imitate your mom because your mom knows how to get stuff out of your brain, doesn't she? Your mom will say things like, where have you been? Who else was there? What have you been doing? Why are you late? And how are you going to clean this up? Right? Your mom becomes a master question asker. So if you, oh teenager, if you want to become a better thinker, you have to become a better question asker to yourself. And yet,
Mm,
almost all of school for a very long time has not been about learning to ask questions, but about giving the right answers to questions that someone else asked you. Right. Okay, now here's the irony of it. What's the newest, hottest career out there right now? Prompt engineer. What does an AI prompt engineer have to do? Ask really good questions.
hmm.
And you can't do that without a lot of really good information. And
Without a
so,
doubt.
again, what you get out of AI is only as good as what's going to go into it. And then your method of getting it out is to have this skill of asking very good questions. So, um, I think what we're going to see again is there's going to be this increasing disparity between people who can think and people have no clue how it's done.
Mhm.
And the people who can think are going to control everything and everybody else.
Yeah.
Which is why, for me, this is crisis mode right now. This is like retirement is not on my list of things that I even consider because I feel like we're in this civilization crisis moment. And I
Mhm.
would be remiss, I would be a sin of omission if I didn't pour everything I can into helping people see the truth of where we are and eh, help rescue as many young people as we can and get them out of this system that's chewing them up and creating. I actually listened to a video of a middle school teacher yesterday, and she said, I'll tell you what my middle schoolers don't know. They don't know their right from their left. They don't even know how to tie their shoes. They don't know how to read. They don't know any math. They don't know their mom's phone number. They don't even know their address. They may not even know what state they live in, or they might know, but they're not sure if it's a state or a city. And that's how bad it is. You're like, no, this has got to be the exception rather than the rule. Surely this is hyperbole. This can't be actually true. You can't have 12-year-olds that are that brain dead.
Hmm.
But, if I don't know if it's true, but it kind of underscores the urgency on my side, I guess.
Well, I mean, we know you're doing everything you can, and it is 10:50, so I want to make sure I have you off of here. I will put all the links for where they can find you. If you want to just, it's everything's on your website, right? Your social media, YouTube, look them up. You can find them. Mr. Andrew, I appreciate you squeezing this in for us, man. You are an absolute rock star, and thank you. Just thank you, man.
Well,
Yes, thank you.
I'm hoping that you and I can get together in person at some
I
point.
know, I know. We got to maybe one of the conventions you're going to. I'll book a trip out there and do it because I want to meet you in person for sure,
Well,
man. I'm
you're in Florida, right?
yes, sir. West Palm Beach.
Yeah, well, I'll be not too far from there. I'll let you know.
Let me know. I'll make a trip.
All right. God
Have a good
bless
day,
you.
sir.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye bye.